The quiet power of humility. In today's world, it can feel like being seen is everything. We live in a culture that praises visibility. A culture where success is often measured in likes, followers, and public applause. We are told to share more, post often, speak louder, and make sure the world knows what we are doing and who we are. It's easy to believe that if no one's watching, then maybe it doesn't count. Maybe we don't count. But the Buddha once said, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise remain unmoved by praise or blame. Let that sink in for a moment. Because in a world where everything pushes us to perform, there's something quietly radical about choosing not to. There's a misunderstood strength in keeping a low profile, not out of fear, not out of hiding, but from a deep inner knowing. A kind of peace that doesn't need to shout to be real. You see, the ego craves recognition. It wants to be validated, admired, remembered. And when we tie our worth to how many eyes are on us, we start performing rather than living. We feel anxious when we are not seen, and empty when the spotlight fades. That isn't confidence, that's dependence. But what if I told you that the most powerful people I've ever met were also the quietest? They weren't flashy. They didn't broadcast their every move. But their presence was calm, grounded, and real. And that presence spoke louder than any speech. There's a certain kind of freedom that comes when you stop chasing attention. You begin to act from attention, not from a need to impress. You listen more. You observe. You grow in silence. Like roots deepening under the surface, unseen but strong. And here's a question worth asking. Are you doing what you do to be noticed? Or to be whole? Because there's a difference. Humility isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's knowing who you are so deeply that you don't need to prove it. It's standing like a mountain, calm in praise, unshaken by criticism. So in this video, we'll explore the hidden strength of staying humble. Why not know the spotlight might just be the most powerful place to be? And how walking the quiet path in a noisy world can lead to a deeper, lasting peace. If you've ever felt tired of the pressure to constantly show up, to always be seen, this message is for you. Let's take a breath and begin. The root of the need to be seen, ego. Have you ever noticed how quickly we reach for our phones after something good happens? A promotion, a vacation, even a simple homemade meal, we feel this quiet urge to share it. And not just with our close friends, but with everyone. The world. Strangers. A sea of digital eyes. It's not always because we want to boast. Sometimes it's just because we want to feel seen. To feel like what we are doing matters. But here's the hard question. If no one saw it, would it still feel like enough? In today's world, there's an unspoken pressure to constantly present ourselves, to be successful, admirable, relevant. We curate. We post. We polish our stories until they shine. And slowly, without even realizing it, our sense of worth becomes tangled with how we appear. This isn't vanity. It's ego. Ego isn't just arrogance. It's that fragile part of us that's terrified of being invisible. It whispers, if they don't notice you, you're not enough. If no one applauds, then maybe your efforts don't matter. And so, we chase recognition. Not because it fills us, but because it quiets that fear. At least for a moment. But here's the problem. That kind of joy doesn't last. The moment the likes slow down or the spotlight fades, so does the feeling of worth. And we are left needing our next fix of validation. That isn't freedom. That's dependence. You see, the Buddha understood this long before social media ever existed. He taught that the ego is always hungry, always craving praise, status, attention. But like a fire that never has enough fuel, it can never truly be satisfied. It keeps you reaching, but never resting. What if success wasn't about being noticed, but about being whole? What if we could uncouple our value from visibility? What if your joy could come from the doing itself, not the reaction it gets? This isn't about disappearing from the world. It's about showing up differently. From a place of peace rather than performance. From a heart that's grounded and not seeking constant applause. Because the truth is, when you no longer need the world to see you, you finally start seeing yourself. The image of the Buddha, the quiet power of presence. There's something striking about the image of the Buddha. Not just in his posture, or his robes, or the serene smile on his face, but in his silence. He wasn't a king, though he was born into royalty. He didn't seek fame, though his wisdom traveled across centuries. He didn't crave applause, but his presence moved hearts more deeply than words ever could. The Buddha didn't shout his teachings. He embodied them. He never needed titles or recognition, because he knew true power doesn't need to announce itself. Real peace doesn't need to be loud. That might sound strange in today's world. A world where we are often told to market ourselves, to build a brand, to make sure people know who we are and what we've done. But the Buddha chose a different path, a quieter one. A path where being mattered more than being noticed. And maybe that's what we're missing. Because the more we try to prove ourselves, the more we drift from who we truly are. We shape-shift to fit expectations. We become louder, flashier, not because we want to, but because we're afraid we won't matter unless we do. But think about it, when was the last time you met someone who didn't need to prove anything? Someone whose energy felt calm, unshaken, grounded, like a still lake on a quiet pond. There's a kind of power in that silence. The kind that doesn't beg for attention, but naturally draws it in. The Buddha taught that the wise do not display their treasures. That doesn't mean hiding the light. It means not attaching your worth to how brightly it shines in the eyes of others. There is a deep freedom in keeping a low profile, not out of fear, but out of clarity. When you're not constantly managing how others see you, you can finally see yourself. When you're not chasing praise, you can focus on growth, real growth, the kind that happens in silence, beneath the surface, where it's undisturbed by noise and comparison. So maybe we don't need to be more visible. Maybe we need to be more present. To let our peace, our actions, our kindness speak for us quietly, consistently, and powerfully. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voices that last. It's the most genuine ones. The silent monk and the quiet power of humility. There's a story I love, simple, quiet, and yet unforgettable. In a remote monastery, tucked deep in the hills, there lived a monk. He wasn't the abbot. He didn't lead ceremonies. He never gave grand teachings. But every morning, long before the sun rose, he would quietly sweep the monastery grounds. No audience. No spotlight. Just the soft sound of the broom brushing against stone. He didn't announce what he was doing. He didn't wait for praise or acknowledgement. He simply showed up with presence, with peace, and with unwavering consistency. At first, few noticed. After all, humility rarely demands attention. But over time, the other monks began to see something remarkable. While many debated scriptures, this monk embodied them. While others spoke of peace, he radiated it in every movement, in every breath. There was no sermon, and yet his silence taught more than words ever could. That's the quiet power of humility. We often think of humility as shrinking ourselves, staying small. But in truth, humility isn't weakness. It's strength, the kind that doesn't need to be loud. In today's world, where value is often measured by how many followers you have or how loudly you speak, the monk reminds us that there's another way to live. A way where dignity comes not from attention, but from intention. Where service isn't about being seen, but about being sincere. Ask yourself, would I still do what I do if no one ever gave me credit? Would I still offer kindness if no one noticed? Because that's where the real transformation happens, in the unseen moments, in the quiet acts, in the practice that no one claps for. Humility doesn't mean denying the light. It means letting your light shine, not to impress, but to illuminate. Not to prove, but to be. The monk never asked to be noticed. But in time, his presence became unforgettable. Because when we stop chasing recognition, we start becoming whole. When we let go of needing to be important, we begin to live with importance. Not in the eyes of the crowd, but in the soul of our own being. So maybe the most powerful sermons aren't shouted from the stage. Maybe they are whispered through action. Maybe they are spoken through silence. And maybe, just maybe, the broom in our hand is more sacred than the spotlight we see. Humility is not weakness, it's wisdom in disguise. We live in a world where being loud is often mistaken for being strong. Speak up, stand up, go big or go home, that's what we are told. And somewhere along the way, humility got a bad reputation. It's seen as passive, as small, as weak. But in Buddhist wisdom, humility is something entirely different. It's not the absence of strength, it's the quiet presence of wisdom. A humble person doesn't need to convince you of who they are. They already know it. They are not chasing praise, and they are not afraid of criticism. They don't shrink, they just don't need to shine in every room they enter. Think about that for a moment. When someone truly knows themselves, they don't need the world to constantly confirm it. They move through life like bamboo in the wind, flexible but unshakable. They bend when life pushes them, but they don't break. Because their strength comes from the inside, not from validation outside. And that's the kind of strength we rarely talk about. We often confuse humility with insecurity. But the truth is, insecure people are the ones constantly trying to prove something. The humble have nothing to prove. Because they are not performing, they are living. And in a world of noise, that kind of quiet confidence is magnetic. Have you ever met someone who didn't speak much, but when they did, everyone leaned in? That's not by accident. That's presence. That's depth. That's the kind of energy humility carries, soft but undeniable. So the next time you feel the pressure to speak louder, be flashier, or assert yourself just to be seen, pause and ask, am I acting from my truth or from my fear of being overlooked? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be grounded, calm, clear. No spotlight needed. And maybe that's what real wisdom looks like. Not in how loudly we speak, but in how peacefully we live. The trap of recognition and comparison. There's nothing wrong with being seen. We all want to be appreciated. It's human. To have our efforts noticed, our voices heard, our presence acknowledged, that's natural. But something shifts when that desire becomes a need. When being seen turns into a craving and then into a performance. Suddenly, we are no longer living from the inside out, we're living for the applause. We check who's watching. We adjust ourselves to fit what we think people will like. And before we know it, we are no longer expressing, we're performing. Have you ever caught yourself posting something online, not because it truly moves you, but because you thought it would impress someone else? Or comparing your quiet moments to someone else's highlight reel? It happens to all of us. Because we've been conditioned to measure our worth through reflection, not self-reflection, but the mirror of others' approval. But here's the truth, that kind of validation is always temporary. One day they praise you, the next they forget you. And if your peace depends on that roller coaster, you'll never find stillness. In Buddhism, this is called clinging, holding tightly to something impermanent, hoping it will give us lasting happiness. But it doesn't. Clinging to recognition breeds anxiety. Clinging to comparison breeds insecurity. Clinging to attention breeds exhaustion. We become afraid to be forgotten, to fall behind, to be unseen. But in that fear, we lose the one thing we truly have, our presence, our authenticity. So how do we free ourselves? We remember that we are not our reputation. We are not the number of likes or followers or compliments we gather. We are the stillness underneath it all, the part of us that remains whole even when no one is watching. And that's the paradox. The less you seek to be seen, the more powerful your presence becomes. Because it's no longer a performance. It's real. It's you. So the next time you feel the pull to prove yourself, to compete, to compare, pause. Breathe. And ask, am I doing this to be true to myself or just to be seen? Because being seen might feel good. But being free, truly free, feels better. How to walk the quiet path. In a world that constantly tells us to speak louder, move faster, and be more visible, choosing the quiet path may feel unnatural. But silence doesn't mean invisibility. Stillness isn't weakness. Sometimes the most powerful presence is the one that doesn't seek attention at all. So, how do we walk that quiet path in a noisy world? It begins with speaking less, not out of fear, but out of mindfulness. You don't have to fill every silence. You don't have to explain yourself endlessly. When you do speak, let your words carry care, speak truth, not ego. Avoid the urge to boast. You have nothing to prove. And strangely, when you stop trying to impress people, that's when they really begin to listen. Next, act without needing credit. Do good not for recognition, not for applause, not even for gratitude. Do it because it's who you are. There's a quiet kind of joy in kindness that no one sees. A kind of grace that doesn't need a spotlight. Like planting a seed in the dark, you may never see it bloom, but the world will be better because you did. And then ask yourself often, am I doing this from the heart, or am I doing it to be seen? It's an honest question and not always easy to answer. But self-reflection is what turns actions into practice and practice into wisdom. Celebrate others. Lift them up without needing to lower yourself. Support their life without questioning your own. True humility means you don't see others as competition, you see them as companions on the same journey. And finally, stay grounded. Remember this, attention is fleeting. Today's applause becomes tomorrow's silence. But when your peace doesn't depend on being noticed, you become free. Free to live, free to grow, free to rest. Walking the quiet path doesn't mean tapping away from life, it means showing up fully, but without needing to be the loudest voice in the room. So let your stillness speak. Let your heart guide your steps. And trust that what is real, what is rooted in truth, doesn't need to shout to be heard. When silence speaks louder than words. In a world where everyone has something to say. Where every moment is filled with opinions, noise, and the pressure to respond. Silence has become a rare and powerful form of wisdom. But let's be clear, silence doesn't mean ignorance. It's not weakness. It's not that you don't have something to say. It's that you've come to realize and that everything needs to be said. We've been taught to speak up, defend ourselves, prove our point, get the last word in. But what if true strength lies not in how loudly we speak, but in how deeply we listen? The Buddha rarely spoke unless it was necessary. He didn't argue to win. He didn't interrupt to impress. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was presence. It was awareness. It was clarity. Think about the last time you stayed silent in a moment of tension. Not out of fear, but out of calm. Not because you were unsure, but because you were sure of yourself. That kind of silence comes from within. It's the silence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. The silence of someone who listens to understand, not to reply. And in that silence, something shifts. You begin to see more. You notice what others miss. You hear what's not being said, the emotion behind the words, the fear behind the anger, the longing behind the noise. Wise people don't speak to dominate the room. They speak to connect. They don't debate for ego, they observe for insight. They respond instead of react. Because when you're at peace with yourself, you don't need to convince others. You don't need to be right. You just need to be real. So the next time you feel the urge to jump in, to argue, to explain, to defend, pause. Let the silence stretch for just a moment longer. You might be surprised by what it reveals about them and about you. Because sometimes the wisest thing you can say is nothing at all. Letting go of image, the path to real freedom. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to be someone? Not to live, not to love, but to constantly hold up an image of yourself. The version of you that looks good in front of others. The version that seems smart, strong, successful, calm, even when inside you know those things. Most of our energy, believe it or not, doesn't go into work or responsibilities. It goes into managing perception, into curating ourselves on social media, in conversations, even in our silence. We shape our words, our expressions, our choices, just to make sure we're seen a certain way. But the Buddha taught that this self we work so hard to protect, this image, is just an illusion. It's not who we really are. And the more tightly we cling to it, the further we drift from our true nature. Letting go of the need to be someone, that's where the freedom begins. You don't need to be the smartest in the room. You don't have to appear calm when your heart is heavy. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Imagine how light life would feel if you didn't have to constantly perform. The truth is, the fear of being misunderstood, forgotten, or judged is what keeps us trapped. But once you stop trying to control how people see you, once you allow yourself to simply be, something beautiful happens. Stillness arises. Not the stillness of doing nothing, but the stillness of not pretending. The peace of no longer chasing approval. It's okay to be unknown. It's okay to be misunderstood. Even the Buddha was misunderstood in his lifetime, yet he didn't cling to his image. He lived his truth quietly and let his life speak. So ask yourself, what image am I working so hard to protect? And what might happen if I simply let it go? Letting go doesn't mean disappearing. It means showing up without the mask. It means trusting that who you are beneath the image is already enough. And that is real freedom. The quiet influence leading with virtue, not fame. In today's world, leadership often looks loud. It looks like stage lights, speeches, followers, and influence that can be measured in numbers. But in the eyes of the Buddha, true leadership is something very different. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's not about commanding attention or gathering applause. It's about quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to make an impact. In Buddhism, the most powerful leaders are often the most humble. They speak softly, live simply, and walk with integrity. They don't lead by force, they lead by example. Not because they're trying to convince others to follow them, but because their way of being naturally inspires reflection. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who didn't say much, but just being around them made you want to be better? Someone whose calm presence made you feel safe. Someone who made you reflect, not by what they said, but by how they lived. That is quiet influence. It's subtle, but it runs deep. The Buddha never told people to follow him. He didn't chase fame or gather crowds. He simply embodied truth, compassion, and stillness, and the world came to him. That's the paradox. The people who chase influence rarely hold it for long. But those who live with wisdom and compassion often shape the world without ever seeking to. You don't need to lead thousands to make a difference. You don't even need to call yourself a leader. Just live with integrity. Be kind when no one's watching. Stay honest even when it's hard. Show patience in moments of pressure. That's how real influence begins, in silence, in small moments, in the choices no one applauds. True leaders don't create followers. They awaken other leaders. So ask yourself, who do I become in the quiet moments? Am I living in a way that brings peace to others, even if I never get credit for it? The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more presence. More people who live what they believe. More silent examples of strength, grace, and compassion. Be that example. Not to be noticed, but because it's who you are. That's how you lead without trying. That's how you change the world without saying a word. Do you want to be seen or be free? In a world that never stops talking, where every moment seems like an opportunity to post, perform, and prove. What does it really mean to be free? We are taught from a young age to be seen, to be successful, to stand out, to get noticed. We chase applause, likes, recognition, thinking that visibility means value. But somewhere along the way, we lose something. We lose the quiet. We begin living for the eyes of others. Measuring our worth by how many people are watching, listening, approving. It feels good for a while. But then the applause fades. And suddenly we're alone with a version of ourselves we don't even recognize. The Buddha once said, just as a still rock is unmoved by the wind, so too is the wise person unmoved by praise or blame. That kind of stillness is rare today. But it's powerful. Because in a loud world, the quiet soul doesn't disappear, it stands out. Not through noise, but through depth. Not by performing, but by being real. I want to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who didn't talk much, didn't try to impress, but somehow you couldn't forget them? They didn't shine through attention. They shine through presence. That's the kind of person the world remembers, even if the world never sees them. See, humility doesn't mean hiding. It means being rooted. It means knowing who you are without needing the world to confirm it. It's not that being seen is wrong, but when we need it, we are no longer free. Every time we cling to image, every time we adjust ourselves to gain approval, we hand over a piece of our peace. But what if we choose something different? What if we stopped chasing attention and started listening to it? What if instead of trying to be visible, we tried to be whole? Because here's the truth. The moon doesn't shout, but it lights the night. Still water reflects the sky. And a humble heart reflects wisdom. The Buddha didn't shout his teachings. He embodied them. And in doing so, he became them. So I leave you with a question. One that only you can answer. But will shape how you live from this moment forward. Do you want to be seen, or do you want to be free?